Okay, all you devils, how we doing? Sam here with you. It's the 28th of February here, and we're going to take a look at Bitcoin and a couple of traditional assets as well. It's just a remarkable week, just incredible volatility in the market. So many of you, I'm sure are glad we've gotten to Friday here. So this is really unusual times here. But let's, as technicians, it's our job is just to look at how it's moving. And let's start with Bitcoin here. So Bitcoin, interestingly, well, we're moving very technically, and pretty much we're picking up right where we left off last Friday with the anticipation here. Oh, you guys may recall from that video we did. We said, well, this looks like it's likely to get tested, right? The structure here was just too juicy. Not to mention it's right at a 50. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we're done here. I mean, you can make a case for it. So you've got to interpret this a couple of different ways, and it's too soon to really make the call here as to whether or not we have a pivot. There is a count here, as was so typical with Bitcoin. You can count this a couple of different ways. If we've got a WXY, you can make a case here that we're done. So if it's A, B, C into the W into the X here, and now we've gone A, B, C right into the 50. I mean, there's a reasonable argument here that's a reasonable spot to anticipate the pivot. Now, we can't really confirm it until we see if we get a motive wave coming off of this. And right now, yeah, we got the reaction that you can anticipate that, right? So regardless if you buy into the idea of an algorithm participating in here, just the structure alone, and just the 50%, right? I mean, that's just human nature. People go, oh, well, about halfway down seems like a reasonable spot to start looking to get long again. So you can understand why the 50 is so commonly seen in the markets here. Now, add into what, if you're a viewer here, we know software will be responsive there, but it certainly doesn't guarantee that we have the pivot, because you could equally count this in order to simplify it. The other way you could count this is just as an ABC. So we could have simply, because you can get a 5 in here. We could have A, B gone here rather than an X. And if that's the case, then we've got 1, 2, a very clear impulse here. Looks like this case that it's completed, we'd be in 3, 4, 5 coming down here to complete that ABC. Now the symmetry starts to get stretched a bit there, given the A, B relative to the C. But just to make it all that more difficult to really have a lot of confidence in it, if I use my alternate price tool, if I'm thinking that this is 1, 2, and we've just completed via the impulse that's in here, we've just completed the 3. Well, as you'll see here, and perhaps many of you have done this, right, we just look at our high probability zone for a third. Well, we have literally just come down and tagged it, which makes you think, right? So the symmetry actually looks better. It looks a little bit more solid here in terms of that. Again, that right look. If that's 1, 2, 3 has gone in here, again, right in the pocket where you're anticipating it. So if we get a bounce here, that starts to look pretty solid for the 5 to come in here to give you the, well, it wouldn't be a Y in that case. It would be an A, B, and a C. But then you'd be looking at the length of the A projected from the C. So just to carry through on that thought, if this is, if that's the A here and this is the B, right? Well, here would be the 272, 227. Yeah, I know it's getting a little crowded in there. Let me get this one off. Here, we'll pull them off just so we can see a little bit more clearly. So if this is, do I have that right? So if this was, shit, I got the wrong way. So this would, here, I take this off here just so I don't confuse myself. So if this is A, B, and now we're looking for the C here. Let me change that color just so we don't get lost on what's what in there. Let's go up a degree. If that's A, B, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're going down for the C. Well, then the length of the A here, locking in on that pivot, it's very close. So here using that as the B. So right here, note, right, it's almost identical. Do you see that overlap here? Let me see if I can show it to you this way. I know it gets really crowded in here. Let's see. So if I take the length of this A projected from this B, do you see the two? Jesus, I know that's hard to see. Do you see the two of them in here? So we've got this interesting confluence point here. So here's the first one right here. Here's the second one that's a little bit bigger. We've just split the two of them. So this we know is a technical pivot. Again, doesn't mean that we're done here, but you can understand why we're getting a little bit of a reaction here. Then now you add in the structure, the 50, all of the other things that were there waiting for it, and it starts to make more sense. So you can see with that confluence here, now let's get these guys all off, just because our chart is going to be impossible to read. All right, so something down here, definitely a technical pivot, but is it A, B, right, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? No way to confirm it until we see if we get a 3 or a 5 coming off of that. But again, you can just see I'm just wicking off the structure as a likely location. So if we're going to retrace, well, then we just put the whole thing together as we would with any impulse, and just if that's the low. So coming back here to the 38, prior structure, puts us down here for the 5 to give us the C, to give us the 2. Now put the whole thing together from the low, see how that lines up. So from the pivot low, voila, right? So let's get that right on. Gives you a nice little pivot. Now look what's right there, that high volume node sitting right there. So if we're coming down here, there's your, I mean, it's hard not to like it. So you could even start putting, if that's going to be the 2 and that's going to be that, you start to put some of this together. You've got your center line here. I mean, you got a lot of things pointing down here. We know Bitcoin's been very responsive at the golden zone, but it's been also very responsive at 50. So we know this was a perfect 50. There's a few, there were a couple other in here. So, but we know the golden zone, we're likely to get strong algo participation here. Now, again, we start to put the roadmap together, but it's too soon to make any call here, right? You're guessing, right? Sure, it's an educated guess, but the WXY, yeah, I would be, if you're anxious to get long here, I would keep the size modest here and just do the math and say, well, can I afford, if we go back down here and we test the golden zone here, can I afford that drawdown without getting pinched in terms of margin, or whether you're using leverage? I mean, and any of the variables here that would have you uncomfortable, right? So you don't want to get to that point to where you're like, oh shit, man, that's too big. No, you can't sleep. You get checking the market 12 times a day. You want to avoid those kind of mistakes. There's no need to be that heavy here, because if it starts to go, right? So if we get, let's see if I can do it. If it starts to go here and we get a 5 here, you can almost just anticipate the 2. It's much like as we were going through this, and the 50 looked like, when we were up here, 50 looked a long way away, and then boom, right? I know Sensei Hove had a tweet like, if we start to retrace, just don't forget 50 is your friend. So what do? We go to the 50 to the tick. So that's why I say, right, even if it goes higher, right, at some point the temptation to take profit is just overwhelming for people. And in just the slightest little weakness, that'll hit the stops, which will fuel it a little bit further. And eventually you'll have the opportunity, just as you're getting the opportunity here. Now, again, we don't know that that's the pivot, right? Because, again, just as easily we end up here. So if you're hungry for a little Bitcoin here, I'd keep this appetizer size. I'd wait for your full size meal down here, right? So the risk would be, of course, lower, right? If you're using the 65, the 707, any of the structure shit, you could use something like this, right? As a potential stop at point. But that's going to be right close to the 707. So there's the 707. Here's the structure here you could use. So anywhere in this zone, because if we're going down to test this big volume profile down here, again, do you want to absorb all that drawdown? If you're a buyer here, do you want to hold it through that? That's an individual choice. You got to decide, right? You could average down, but if we break the 65, then we lose the buy side algos. That's always the danger there. So if we were to break that, it doesn't mean we can't get them back. It just means that if it were to break that far, we've got to wait for the first push out of it, and then we get a 50 or 618, we get them back, we get behind them again. So there you go. I mean, it's interesting times. But Bitcoin, it's technical. That's what you can say here. It's responding technically. Good sign that we didn't just rip through the 50 here, but that's not enough of a bounce to say, oh, we've got our pivot. And with this being open to some interpretation, as is often the case, the market just has to reveal, right? Kind of need another layer to be removed so we can see what's underneath. Okay, all right. So that said, I think that's enough on Bitcoin. Just for those of you watching here on YouTube, we did do this via a live stream this morning, So that's another appeal. I'll take a little 15 seconds here just to remind you guys that the site is now live, and you can join us in the you do have free access, so you can get into the Discord and get to some of the early posting, some of this content, live streams. That's social and above, but that's, just so you know, that's available to you. Yeah, I don't think there's much else to add here, right? So right now it's just done exactly what we were looking for. But again, until we can quantify whether or not we have a pivot here, is it ABC or 1, 2, 3? Yeah, I don't think that I would be overly aggressive here, but I'd be certainly watching closely. Now, a couple of things to look at here before I run out of time. There's 10 minutes. Okay, well, let's go look at the S&P. All right, so let's start with this one. So we're looking a little bit longer term. So here's the 3-day. So it's not unreasonable, just again, some of the subdivision here we'll talk about, but to think we've just completed something here, given the depth of this retracement. So some of the more bullish counts have been just invalidated. So certainly we had looked at some potential counts that had these as ones. Well, with this break here, that's invalidated. Now you can see how the structure is coming back into play here. So are we just in the middle of completing the 5-wave impulse off of the 09 low? It's not an unreasonable stance. Now, the count to complete this as a 5, a little tricky, doable, but it's a little bit of there's an Elliott shuffle in there to get that to work. It's not what you'd hope to see, which would be, just 1, 2, 3, 4. We didn't get that. But this was also a little funky, right? Because you could consider this 3, 4, 5 or A, B, C, and I could play it a couple of different ways. So again, until we get clarity as to what we're doing here, well, just to put this in context, I mean, you can't ignore this possibility. Right? If this is all just completing up here, and note the median lines here that catch the edge of it here, just working off of the prior 4, pretty good right now. So we're back through. So if this is going to start, if this is just we're going into the A, B, C. Coming back down to this, right, seems not out of the realm of possibility. Problem is we don't have a pivot here. So if this is it, if we've got the pivot here and we start here, okay, well then maybe we're back rethinking this. But right now you could make a strong case for just the 5 to have completed here, even though we have this unusual 5th. Now the alternative here, so making that assumption, we're talking about a much, much deeper correction here. And of course, nobody knows how bad this is going to get, right? The people are just guessing. This is, we were kind of talking about this in the live stream today. Very, very few people have traded through something like this, even if nothing. So, I mean, how do you put your arms around this? Really, your primary focus right now needs not to be on rushing into the market, but on capital preservation here, because this is a true black swan. No, there's no way to get any visibility here. Are we going to get some sort of a vaccine? How long is it going to take? Right? What's the impact of the economy, which is the wild card? Nobody knows. So since nobody knows, this you can understand. This is just people are exiting the market. It's not a lot of fresh shorts coming into the market. It's people just protecting, right? So where's all the money rushing into U.S. Treasuries? So I'll use that as a segue. Well, before we go there, because we'll look at gold before we go. So the count, recognizing that in this count, this is open to interpretation, right? This section is a little tricky to get that to work cleanly as a 5. Well, there is an alternate that would have that as corrective, which I had not given a lot of. I thought this was very questionable given how bullish this move here was. But now, since we've invalidated that prior count, thinking that we had a 1, 2, and this was a 3, since we've just blown through all of that structure, you can kind of come back here and say, well, perhaps we're too quick here. Now, this is really, you're pushing the boundaries here to go up to a 1618, the length of this swing here. So if you guys see what I'm measuring here, we're going up to 1618, that length. This is typically about as far as you see them go, but there you are with a 1618. It's a little bit of a front run on that. I mean, it's unusual, but I suppose it's valid. A, B, C. We have to go A into the triangle B up to the C to give us the X. So that's a big X. So if this is coming down, we're going to do A, B, C, right? And now we're back down to some of that structure we were looking at here. Oh, pardon me. I should note I'm in log scale, right? So if we now look at that coming back this way, come here. something like that. Could we come down this low? Well, that's log scale. Take it out of log. We get a little closer. So if this is really going to accelerate, here's the natural area you'd be anticipating that to come down to, which is one hell of a correction to come that far. Now, of course, you'd want to pay attention, right? So with this acknowledged as a contender, of course, we want to pay attention to just swing high to swing low. All right, so what did we just do? All right, there's a 50. So let me tighten that up. Get you tightened and Jesus. Get you nice and tight. All right, so there's our 50. Right, so just like with Bitcoin, 50 is your friend. So all we're doing is, let's get you back here so we can see it. So from this low, out of it's just an arithmetic, right? It's just swing high, swing low, right? That's all an algo sees. Surprised we get a reaction here? I'm not. I mean, that it's pretty much textbook, right? So it's dominant to dominant. We come to a 50. I mean, a pretty good reaction there. Of course, that doesn't. Nothing says we aren't just about to do that. But until we break this, I think there's, bulls have something to cling to, right? That are we going to do that? I think that. Well, here's what I will tell you: if the Fed gets involved here and hints or even just a whiff that they're going to lower rates, and the question is, how much are they going to lower by? Right? Are we talking something more substantial? If they're gonna really be aggressive to try and fight this, and there's going to be enormous political pressure for them to do that. Something like this, right, would be, Jesus Christ, sometimes trading view is just a pain in the ass. That, I think, less likely. But if there's any hint of any sort of central bank intervention here to get the market moving again, it sure would start to be, or whatever we end up here. The market's going to scream higher, right? If they come in and do something, 50 basis points, something like that, then it'll be interesting to see. It wouldn't surprise me that they do it, right? It wouldn't surprise me at all. So right now, what can you say? From the dominant to dominant, I've come to a 50. I've got a reaction. That's pretty much what you can say. Now, is this going to end up being corrective, or is this just right? I mean, there's another case that this could just be a 1-2. I mean, there's a number of different ways you can read this and interpret this, depending on how tight you want to be on how you're counting things. Right? So you get a little bit, even the triangle here is a little bit of a stretch. But there you go, right to a 50, we get a reaction. So we shall see if that holds. It's going to be interesting to see how we look coming in on Monday. And before we sign off here, last market to look at here is gold. Now this we went through this on our live stream today. It's an interesting chart. So look, we can kind of work backwards here, so we can see the perfect impulse here that is now completed. So looking at that, thinking, okay, that's impulsive, so I can work backwards. So it looks like we can go A. You could simplify it and go ABC, but more probably a WXY given the length of time as I'm out here on a daily chart. So from this low, if it's 1, 2, we go up for the 3. So let's see, there's a set of median lines here that I think you'll find interesting. All right, so just using the pivot of the 1, let's get you right on it. Okay, so there's our 1, 2, come up for the 3. So it's just one of those examples that I show you, right? When you're down here at 1100 and you're looking at that median line, you're thinking, really? We're going to go all the way up and get that median line? Does it get any better than that? The only thing that makes that any sweeter is that it's a golden corner. Right, so from your golden corner pocket right there, so from the golden zone, we go up, we get that, right? So it took, how long did that take? So August of 18, and we just got it February of 20. Right, and look at the reaction. So you look at gold today. Gold's a little surprising, right? It's down $60 today. So having tagged that to come down $60 is unbelievable, right? So now you look at that and you think, okay, well, there's likely a little bit of structure here, so that could very well be what we're stalling on here. But I would be surprised if that were it, right? So it's setting up just almost perfectly, right? So it looks like if we were to bounce here, something like that would be I don't know if we got a zigzag, right? It's too early to say. Right? We got to find our pivot, but we've had a little bounce here. But this is it's just stunning, right? You guys, you wonder why that's in the center of my logo, right? It's right there. Is why, right? It's just a perfect example, right? Now, how many people, would have the patience to stay with that, right? And think with that as your target. Interesting, right? So from here, we don't quite. If it's the 3, we don't get a 1618. We get to the 1272 138 window. But I think if we were to look internally, well, let's get that off. All right, so if this is going to go 4, 5, but inside it, if that's the 1 and that's the 2. All right, interestingly, the 3 did the same thing. You see, that's a 1, 2. So just as this 3 did the 138, 1272, this 3 did the same thing. Interesting, right? And then look at it compared to the 4. That's pretty juicy right there. Get that right on it. Length of the 1, if I'm right on it. Projected from the 4. Well, did we just go through it just a hair to go up and get the median line? Pretty interesting. So then we'd look from the 2 to the 3. All right, so we come down just a slight front run on the 38. The Vegas wave is right there. Up we go 2 and through. It looks like it goes through just to get the median line. So pretty juicy. So if that comes down here, you could certainly, if we get that kind of a 3, boy, you'd want to pay attention there. All right. Whether that's the pivot or not, that certainly sets up rather nicely, and it could very well be that sends you back towards the median line. But we'll see how far it goes. Okay, guys, there you go. That should give you plenty to chew on for the weekend. But what just a gorgeous example. All right, with that, we'll wrap it up. I'll remind you guys, you come on over to TradeDevils.com. You can join us for free. Right, we got 3 choices now: free, social, where you'll get early access to any videos that we put out, and of course all the live streaming as we're transitioning over to live stream. That today was our first run at it. We had a couple of little technical glitches, but we're working it out. Should be much smoother next week. Until then, you guys have a good weekend, and we'll catch you on Monday.